Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Today is Monday, August 11th. Tani, can you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
We're now moving into the opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone here who has signed up to speak?
No.
Okay. We would be moving then into our first action item, which is the approval of minutes. Mrs. Voigt.
I move the approval for the minutes of the June 10th meeting as presented.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. That passes 5-0. The next action item for this evening is the approval of vouchers. Heather, do we have questions for this evening?
Yes, we did. The questions came through surrounding what was the purpose of some of the purchases that were made in June. And let me just go down the list and explain then. The Association of Recovery Schools, there was a purchase for $36,404. This, I talked to Mark Lennerer, so he can give you some additional information, but this is for questioning whether or not School District Waukesha should open a recovery high school post-therapy session or setting for individuals, for students. And this is discussing how we should open it. If we do, what does that look like? All of this is being paid for by grant funds to determine if this is the direction that we're going. The second one, Brain Pop, it is specific, $56,000 in excess of, and it's specific to the library. It's a K-12 school-wide subscription of 1,200 topics in English and Spanish. ClassLink, over $42,000. This is tech-related. This is the app track license, as well as the annual license that we have for ClassLink. Edmentum, over $30,000. Student Services owns this one. This is a library program license for high schools and East specifically. Foster and Foster, $6,500. This is under the business office, and this they help us to determine our IBNR for our health. Frontline Technologies, over $50,000, is HR based. It is our absence and substitute management program, as well as employee evaluation management program. Uncharted Learning, over $17,000. It's teaching and learning. It's our mobile makers subscription fee for 25-26 school year. And the last one, Visionary Studios, over $19,000, is eAchieve based. That's the strategic digital marketing partnership.
I just have, so going forward for the questions.
Yes.
Can we get those in writing so that we can see, like, the questions asked as well as kind of the explanation, so I don't have to go back on my chicken scratch so much?
Okay.
Because some of those, like trying to connect the dots, and I think that came up with other questions as to trying to navigate them and then remember and kind of record them. That would be helpful, I think.
Okay, and would that be in an email form or in board docs or both?
An email form is fine.
Okay, fantastic. I can do that.
I think if I recall, Sherry used to just have printouts for us when we came, depending on when the questions came, to say, here's the questions I received. We would walk through them and we could just file them. It was just
Okay.
helpful. Is there any other questions?
There were no others.
Okay. How about from the committee? Okay, I would be looking then for an approval on the vouchers.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Our next action item is the approval of the 2025-2026 preliminary budget and tax levy. Mr. Clark.
Yeah, and included in board docs is a copy of the budget document, and I have a slideshow I threw together, and it's kind of merging. During this process, obviously, the state budget came upon us really quickly, so we've incorporated, I think, majority of the factors included in that budget. I think there's some minor things we need to review before we're back in October for final approval. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the state budget and then transition more into what the budget specific to the preliminary budget looks like. And so just a couple topics I think we need to keep an eye on as we move forward, and that Heather and I will continue to review heading into final approval in October as well. So the preliminary budget document that's in docs, as I mentioned, gives you a couple years of history, some budget comparison data. I've also included in attachments the revenue limit that is the basis for this budget document. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about aid. GPI comes out with an equalization aid estimate every July 1st, and how we've incorporated that and comparing it to the document that we shared with this committee back in June. And then we'll talk about the tax levy summary and what we're looking at in terms of a levy at this point in the process. And we will move forward in what's ahead of us. So over the next several months. So the state, as I mentioned in early July, the 25-27 biennial budget was approved by the state, and there was some good news in there. I think in terms of just revenue authority, I think there was some wins for us in terms of taxation and things like that. I think there's some things that could have been a little better, and I'll touch on those here in a minute. So again, I'm gonna hit on the big funding positions or legislation that move forward. If you remember the last biennial budget, there was the line item veto for the $325 per pupil for 398 years now. That was sustained and is incorporated into the budget cycle for the state this time as well. You can see here, this is what the numbers look like for fiscal year 25-26 will be at 11,650, and then 26-27, 11,975. So those are known numbers, and obviously it's a big part of our revenue moving forward. The other side of that conversation is, though revenue limit authority is increasing with that $325 per pupil, there was no increase in the funding of state equalization aid in either year of the biennial budget. So it's the same pool of money being dispersed. So you have more taxing authority as a board, but that the tax offset or aid offset that you hope to kind of keep the levy stable, and which has been the mantra for the Republicans, I think, for many years is, yeah, we'll increase authority, but we want an equal increase in aid. So over the entire state of Wisconsin, there would be, on average, no tax increase moving forward. So this is just the basic funding formula. Revenue limit authority minus equalization aid equals our local tax levy for revenue limit purposes. So again, just to kind of reiterate and put it in a little different format, there's an inverse relationship between state aid. The purpose of equalization aid is to offset the local property tax levy, and to have made an assumption that aid would be flat as you're adding that $325 per pupil across the state is one I wouldn't have, and I didn't think to even throw out as a suggestion. I did include, I believe it's attached in docs, a memo from the state about all the districts, what their aid calculation looks like. And if you look at that far right-hand column, you can just see all those negative aided or drop in aid school districts across the state of Wisconsin. So I don't think we're alone. From what I saw for Waukesha County, we're certainly not alone. I don't know about the smaller Arrowhead feeder districts, but for the K-12 districts, they're having probably very similar conversations to what we're having tonight in terms of potential levy increases, not to mention the aid that many of them, or the debt that many of them have taken on in the last several years. This is a topic that we've lobbied for and had many discussions with our representatives, and that's the funding of special education costs, or we call it categorical aid. So there was a significant move in this area. So I think some kudos should go out to us for lobbying on this for several cycles at the state level. We've talked about this before, but I'll highlight it again. The state, as they rolled out the budget, said that we would get, currently they said it was 33%. I say currently, I'm still in 24, 25. For last year, they came out and said it was 33%. But once your actual state expenditures come forth, the percentage never holds, because there's more costs hitting the pool of money that they have. So it's not some sufficient, it's some certain. There's a dedicated amount of money in this funding source. And then there's also a lot of it's staffing, busing, those types of things. There's an inflationary factor that they don't put into their math. So what we do as a district, and I think it's a pretty solid assumption by most of the districts in the area, we take about 3% off of what that percentage is to get to a more accurate. But again, to go from 30, what I would consider an active percentage, from 30 to 39% is, a couple $1 million easily for us. So a big step forward. And then there's an increase next year as well where it will go to 42%. So again, on a revenue basis, there's no tax impact here. This is strictly new revenue coming into SDW. So again, I saw this as a significant win for us. Open enrollment transfer amounts also saw a sizable increase for 25-26. SDW is still a positive OE school district, but I'm going to share a slide later on more in the budget side of the presentation, that delta between in and out is getting smaller and smaller, and it's something we need to, as a district and administrative team, dive into the details of what makes that up. Is it e-achieve? Is it brick and mortar? What's driving that change? So we'll talk about that in a little further detail. But as a positive OE school district, to have these dollar amounts and funding levels increased is a net gain for us. It's just not the net gain we had. I mean, certainly what e-achieve in particular sustained during COVID, we knew wouldn't hold over time as kids return to brick and mortar schools. But again, we see this as a win for SDW in the next couple of fiscal years. So I put the basic funding formulas. I know we've been talking a lot about enrollment and different types of enrollment, and so we already talked about the tax levy calculation, but the top half of this slide is on the third Friday of September of every year, we actually count the number of resident kids in our schools, different from the kids who are brick and mortar. So there's probably, I don't know how many ways to count kids, but it's a fair question we get on a pretty regular basis is, well, the number in this report says this and this report says this, what's the difference? They're all a different lens and they're all accurate numbers, but it's really what topic are you talking about? So when we talk funding, and I think the only person in the district who cares about the third Friday resident count, because it's tied to our financial statements, obviously. You take that number, it's a 3-year average, and then this year we'll multiply it by $11,650, and that'll give us our revenue limit authority, and then you continue the calculation down to where you end up with the final tax levy impact. So that's the flow of it. This is, in terms of importance, this is about 85% of our budget is kind of this formula. So I thought it was important to spend a few minutes on it, and to highlight again that there's different types of counts that we talk about. It's not that numbers are changing or anything like that. It's just the way school funding operates. So for this year in particular, this is the last 2 years of pupil counts and then a projected one. So this is another different number. When we talk about a drop in enrollment, we talk about an average 2% drop year over year on third Friday. What actually goes into the revenue limit then adds on summer school, and we get 60% funding for every 4K kid. So that's another number that's different than the third Friday, which is different than the brick and mortar pupil count. So these are the numbers that, the first two are firm numbers. Previous fiscal years, we were at 11,234. We're projecting to be at 10,854 in the fall of 25. Again, that 2% reduction that, our assumption for the last 7 to 10 years has been about 2 to 2.5% reduction. And we've realized that to be a pretty stable number to be using. And then as I was looking back at old revenue limit calculations, we've talked a lot about declining enrollment, obviously, in the last few months. This is just another measure of it, a different count, but the same trend. So I just grabbed a year. In 13-14, our membership count in the revenue limit was 13,071 students, and we're looking at, just this past year, we were under 11,000. It's just another measure of that downward trend of the number of kids in our school district, and then the number of kids in our school buildings. This is an oldie but a goodie. I think this is in every slide deck I put together, whether it's about busing or anything, but I try to sneak it in here. Here's our third Friday pupil count history. Again, it just shows that trend, but I think not only for this particular budget conversation tonight, I also think it's important to reiterate it for our facility conversation, our optimizing the future conversation, that it's an undeniable trend that we have and we think is going to be sustained for several years out. So as we build towards the final levy, I thought we'd spend a few minutes on our Fund 39 long-term debt levy. This budget as written is our best estimate of the district paying off our debt on April 1st of 26. Now we'll finalize that as interest earnings become more finalized throughout the year. So these numbers will get tweaked certainly just a tad in October as we earn a few more months of actual interest, and we can adjust that $2.3 million number down to a more specific number. But I think it's important, even though the final levy we'll look at, or the preliminary levy that we'll look at here in a couple of slides, shows a increase in the levy over last year, and certainly over what I gave you in June. But I think it's important that the taxpayers know that we have a plan that we're in the middle of implementing that set us up for a $5.6 million drop in the Fund 39 levy. And the thought at the time was, hey, there's a new state biennial budget coming up. This will provide us protections. We'll keep our streak of, decreases or slight increases going. And I would have thought at $5.6 million drop from $7.9 million to $2.3 million would have covered that. But it's not the case. That frozen aid pool of money, I think, did us no favors whatsoever. But I think people should know that we did try to establish not only the $5.6 million levy drop in 25, 26, but then again another step down of the Fund 39 levy by roughly $2.3 million to help us offset that next year and maybe provide another levy drop. As I mentioned earlier, the 25-26 year will also provide $325 per pupil, but there's no change in the pool of money for equalization aid again. So I think that'll be an offset. Maybe it'll be enough for no levy increase, but I'm not sure I get that feeling. But I think it was a well laid out plan, and it also allows us to be debt-free next April as the 7th largest school district in the state of Wisconsin. I think that's quite an accomplishment. So here's just a snapshot of last year's levy, just looking at aid and levy. There's some other small aids and things out there, but so the draft I shared in June, I just made the assumption that aid will be flat from the prior year. And that document included a tax change of a decrease of 3.65%. If that would have held true, along with that drop in the Fund 39 levy, we would have realized a 3.65% drop. As you can see in the green highlighted area, DPI's July 1 estimate has us losing 9.21% in equalization aid. So that pool of money is divvied out along all the school districts, 424, 6 or somewhere in that range. But then there's all these variables of enrollment, property valuation, expenditures. Everyone has their new calculation that's done, but you're moving along with all the other states, schools in the state. Not to mention, sometimes there'll be a large district that maybe is not reporting data and things like that we've talked about in the past. But so normally I don't put as much stock in the DPI July 1st estimate because it's based off of last year's budget numbers, not actual numbers, which is the best data they have when they come up with this estimate. So I understand the usage of it, but when no money's being added to the formula, it just made me think that takes one variable out of what you're guesstimating that October aid certification is going to be. So with that, we come out with the same math that we've we just walked through the equation. Our tax levy is actually, at least preliminarily, is at $82,380,000 or a 3.77% increase. Now, a lot of data is going to flow to DPI as fiscal year 24-25 closes and audits are completed. Maybe that improves over time, but I think this is a fair representation of where we could end up, and obviously we'll work to reduce that increase if that is the number that comes out of the formula. But again, it's important to stress, I guess, that if aid would have just stayed flat, we'd be sitting here talking about a 3.65% decrease in the preliminary tax levy. And I've included in board docs the aid estimate too, if you want to go out and look at the variables that are included in that. Again, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, I think, was the author of the aid memo from the state. You can go out and look at all the other states. It's a long list, but there's a lot of negatives on that right-hand column.
Mr. Wood?
Yeah, I'm just going to note, though, that there's two huge, enormous positives in that column. Milwaukee got an increase of $78 million, right? 79? And I'm looking for the other one. I believe it was Racine, 15 million, 15 to 16 million. That's almost $100 million. I don't know where those calculations wind up switching, but I'm looking at the losers in this one, the four biggest losers in this. Madison, Green Bay, Beloit, and Waukesha, the fourth biggest loser in terms of raw dollars. This formula is broken. I would be willing to wager, without having someone tell me for sure that it's the case, that at least in Milwaukee's case, they're getting that extra $78 million because of the enormous referendum they passed and the fact that the formula focuses on dollars spent and doesn't look at what the revenue limit should be beyond what the voters in Milwaukee approved for Milwaukee School District. And I'll point it again, as I have before. When Milwaukee passes a referendum like that, they are passing on a tax increase to every other district in the state that loses funds as a result, and we are the fourth biggest loser as a result of that. I appreciate the fact that the legislature has given us more money for special education, but this has to get fixed. And this is something I think that we as a school district need to really lean on our representatives about, because these referendums, like they're passing in Milwaukee and Racine, are killing us. Killing us. It's a 7% difference in either a tax levy decrease or a tax levy increase for our taxpayers. And it all boils down to a referendum in a district that can't even file their financial reports on time. 79 million.
Dr. Piasek?
I would just add a couple of thoughts to that. I know one of the problems with this equation is that it's always kind of correcting for the prior year to a degree. So the differences are based on where you were at last year. There were some penalties to MPS last year because of the timing of filing those reports. There were significant penalties, and so that redistributed some of that money to other districts. So my takeaway with this component has always been that we cannot rely on this number being something that we have any amount of control over. And so we need to plan our operating expenditures in ways that we're not relying on the state aid formula. And these are big numbers, and for a district of our size, it's a substantial amount of money, plus or minus, but right around 60 million in these budget drafts that we're looking at. So we're going to have to take probably more matters into our own hands to make sure that we can keep things stable. I think obviously we attempted to do that with the referendum debt. Now we're getting to the point where we're going to be debt-free, and that's going to be paid off, and we're just not going to have as many levers that we can work with. I know it's such a complicated formula, but there are other components to this too that kind of get at property density and some of those values and things. And I think in Waukesha County in particular, and with a lot that's been going on with the housing market, I think Kettle Moraine is struggling with some of the same challenges. But again, these are just not numbers that we can rely on having control around. So that means that we're going to have to I think, plan a little bit more conservatively in terms of what we do with the budget going forward.
Oh, sorry.
No, you answer.
No, I was just to add, that's one thing the MPS reporting has done. It's also taken consistency out of it. And that's one thing I think most taxpayers look for at a minimum is, but now we're getting these waves back and forth where 2 years ago, we really lost out on aid because there was the big correction. And then last year they came back and they added aid and,
And we have Madison coming right behind them next year. So it's not going to end.
one thing that, that'll help us in the aid formula, but I don't think it offsets what you're talking about right now, is once our costs related to our debt falls off, our shared costs will go down substantially as well. So that's some win, but you'll realize that next year, and then it'll take you to the next year to get it into the aid formula and make the difference. But that's out there is hopefully some silver lining to us becoming debt-free and doing what we can to control our tax levy.
Mrs. Voigt?
The third Friday count, when we, at Teaching and Learning, they heard from Hadfield, and the fact that we had picked up 52 students there after the numbers were tallied in September. Is there any way that can be refigured into the process? When you pick up 50 extra kids that, you're responsible to pay, for their education, it just doesn't seem fair. Like, there's no second chance in the school year to get the numbers right.
Not when it's significant, and Jim, maybe you can speak to a little bit too. If you miss Friday, they let you count kids Thursday and Monday, but if a kid shows up 3 weeks later or things like
A
that.
week later.
Yeah, there's not a lot of leeway in the legislation, but I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, sure. So it's a good point, Mrs. Voigt. There is no mechanism for that currently in public schools. There is that opportunity, though, in the voucher schools. They do a rebalancing or check in May, we've learned. And so we have had some conversations. We learned that actually from our legislators. And so we've started some dialogue with our legislators. It's obviously a much deeper and much larger endeavor in public school, in terms of the dollars and the amount of districts that we would have to think about. But there is an example of it. It just doesn't exist for public schools currently.
Dr. Piasek?
Maybe just to close that topic, though, I think it's a really good point that Mrs. Voigt made. And if maybe Mr. Wad, we can refer this over to the policy and government relations, because I know we do have an open dialogue with our representatives. And I know this has come up in conversation, but I think when they get down to business with the budget, it's kind of an afterthought. But for us in particular, I think we could probably model out what that looks like and what it costs us.
So here's the tax levy summary that's in the document before you tonight. So as I had mentioned, we're looking at a 3.77% increase, going up to $82,380,252. Right now, we're using a EAV increase of 5%, but again, that doesn't change our revenue line. It's just we need a number to calculate the rate off of. So this is I believe it's our 10-year average that we use, but obviously on October 1st, we'll get out the real number that will go into that calculation. So the tax rate, if you, people talk a lot about tax rate, and I think it's because it's a simple number to keep in mind and have. So our tax rate, even though the levy's going up, if we realize a 5% increase in property valuation, our rate will actually decrease because that base of property valuation within our boundaries is just so significant. So that's the numbers that we'll be looking at in terms of, at least again, this budget goes to the budget hearing in September, and then we finalize everything in October, so keep that in mind as well. This is a slide, I just threw it in there just because it's a topic that obviously impacts the development of the 25-26 budget and then the close of the prior year. But you can just see the teal colored is the OEN. This is everything, E-Achieve, brick and mortar, whatever program. And then the gold line is the OE out. And you can just see that steady just ticking up in the last few years. Obviously, the teal, as we mentioned, in 2021, 21, 22, that was the COVID impact, so I don't really think you can look at those numbers and say, those were great. The other thing that's happening, and we've talked about it, at least administratively, but I think here as well, the number of virtual schools that are out there now has increased significantly. Districts are scrambling to retain kids, so there's more competition out there. But I think this is an area that we'll spend some time looking a little deeper into, but I thought it was worth sharing because of as I mentioned, the immediate impact on the budget. So. And here's the expenditures. One other thing I should add in the budget booklet, the audited, or the numbers for 24, 25 were a shot in time. Those are not audited numbers within those line items. Actually, the field work for the audit started last week, and we'll be going through that audit process for the next 2 months, probably. So just keep that in mind as you look at the documents. So as presented, we are balanced for our general fund at $168.2 million. I'll just go down and you'll see some Fund 27 always balances out because we do a transfer at the end of the year, so I can guarantee you we will end the year balanced in that one. When you look at the total expenditures versus the total revenue, it's the debt service that really is kind of skewing that range because we've built up reserves in Fund 39 over the last several years to make the debt payment, but then all the expenditures hit in 1 year. So if you look, we have $8.6 million sitting in fund balance right now for debt service purposes. We add the 2.3, and then that expenditure comes, so that'll be the drop off there. Maintenance, Fund 41, this is where our larger CIP projects go. The expenditures are outpacing the revenue because if you remember, we passed Phase 3, that CIP bundle of packages that was HVAC for South Fieldhouse and the instructional wing, South Stadium, auditorium improvements, boilers, I think, at West, if I remember. We're phasing those or ending those projects this summer, and some of that rolls into 25, 26 fiscal year. But we struggle with that every year with the capital improvements crossing over the fiscal year. Other than that, food service, we're budgeting a deficit there. We are starting to track some custodial time because into the Fund 50, we are allowed to do that. It takes some legwork to accomplish that for DPI. But I think it's starting to reflect the true cost of running that program because take a elementary head custodian spends probably half their day related to food service, prep, clean. So I think we're getting a better picture moving forward there. So that's just a recap of the auxiliary funds. And then I can answer any questions you have. Moving forward, I put the budget calendar in board docs as well. So we'll have the third Friday count in September. October 1st, we'll get the property valuation. But then the big date is October 15th or the nearest business day around that date. We'll get our certified equalization aid then. And then at the end of October, we have a special meeting to approve the final budget and tax levy. So this, the purpose of this preliminary document is just to have something to present at the budget hearing, which we're required to hold. But we say that with knowing that a lot of key data is still outstanding.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Harland.
So you had spoken about funding for summer school as well as 4K. I just want to, seek clarification. The 4K funding is only for full-time 4K students. It is not the part-time programs?
There's two programs. You can get funding at 0.6 level compared to a first grader. And that's an hour requirement. So really what you do with the kindergartners is they're funding the same, but you count the minutes that they're in session, and then you extrapolate that out to the equivalency of a first grader or second grader. And then we multiply that FTE that comes from that calculation by the $11,625. So we try to do as much 0.6 programming, obviously, as we can. And part of that, our optimizing the future discussions is standardizing that 4K offering across our sites and with our community partners to try to capture as many of those minutes as you possibly can.
Do we have any sort of estimate as to how much we aren't currently capturing that we feel like we could?
I don't have an estimate on that, but I could include that as a Friday update or something.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? This is a required action for this evening. And just to kind of close out, I think you did a really great job of being able to show the pieces that move. There's a lot of different parts that make up a budget, and often what our community will hear first is that you're going to be increasing my taxes. And I think we need to be really clear that the messaging that we're doing this year is really the result of, you've got a 398-year increase per pupil that isn't offset by funding, which is then a requirement for the taxpayer, but as well as the equalization aid, and really to getting to Mr. Wad's point, which is the MPS debacle of their referendum and their financial statement chaos has really put the rest of the state in a challenging position when it comes to managing their own districts. And I really think the community needs to hear that loudly when you start to hear that the levy is going to go up. Mrs. Voigt.
Can we include that in the press release? You know, like, they're not a ton of people watching this meeting, you know, dying to hear. I know it's not the highest ratings.
I'm hearing that rumor more and more, and I'm getting a little,
I don't get it.
But I think we really do. We have to communicate to them, you know, what we've heard, you know, as we make the decision that we have to approve the budget as presented because of those circumstances.
I think that's something to look into. I think that's a good point. Based on that, I'd be looking for a motion.
we usually do two motion, well, we've done it both ways over the years, of a motion to approve the total revenues and expenditures, and then a motion to approve the levy. I think that's the cleanest way, if that's all right with the committee.
It is. Do you have the script? Do you usually have the script for
I
me?
usually don't have a script, but it's usually something along the line of approving the budget, the 25-26 preliminary budget with total revenues of, and then total expenditures of, and then approving the tax levy with that amount as well.
Mr. Wad?
Just a quick question off the top of my head. Does a school district have any right to appeal the decision on the aid amount that we get? I don't know what our grounds for it would be. I'm just wondering off the top of my head, can we say this is unacceptable? Right? You can't ask us to run a school district and find out a month before we have to approve a budget that we've got a $7 million shortfall from what we had last year with no explanation other than, geez, Milwaukee's getting 80 million more. And I'm not even saying we should. I'm just wondering, does that exist? Is there an appeal process?
I'm not aware of there being an appeal process on the distribution of the funds. The only time and this is going back many years, the only time I've appealed an aid calculation was when there was an error in their data. So
Do we know their data for, say, Milwaukee or Racine is correct?
I don't know that.
Just given that we can't trust Milwaukee's reporting, apparently, or at least haven't historically for the last couple of years.
I'm not aware of any appeal process, but it doesn't mean you can't generate the question, I guess. Again, the only time I've had, and this is going back before technology's become so refined, was it was a much more manual type of process. There'd be something you'd flag and, hey, that wasn't our expenditures, or that wasn't. I've never looked at it outwardly, I guess.
Dr. Piasek?
Of course, I just got an internet error when I was trying to pull up a document from 1 year ago. But here's the problem. We did get a considerable increase last year over what we were actually budgeting for. And we didn't appeal that. But the problem is that we cannot predict it. The problem is that there's a large amount of money that our budget relies on, that our local tax levy relies on, that we can't predict. We are not in control of the financial situation. And we've tried to work with, you know, a $60 million safety referendum to make that work for our constituents and so that people didn't see these big swings. We tried to manage the swings. But now we're in a situation where we're totally at the mercy of these state aid calculations. And, you know, it unfortunately favors districts who have large referenda because you have this upside of revenue and you have levers to pull. But as a fiscally conservative board, and I think not just over the last few years, but for quite some time, and in a community where the local property taxes are already not super low. Like, you know, the last thing we want to do is be dumping 10, 15, 20% levy increases on our local taxpayers. So the challenge that I have is not, I mean, the plus or minus 10%, it's unmanageable. We're not in control of it. And I think we should be verifying to the best of our ability that the numbers that the DPI is putting out are accurate. I think we have a responsibility to do that. But we're just running out of things that we can control. So I think we're just at the mercy of this very complicated funding formula and what other districts are choosing to do, which is bordering on irresponsible. Not bordering, it just is.
Yeah, last year's aid formula had a $1.5 million add. The adjustment was an add, and I want to say the year before was like 800 or 900,000.
The other.
The other way.
The other way. So there was a huge swing, which again, stability is, I think, what people pursue, but it's.
Those are fractional numbers compared to what we're talking
They
about
are.
this year.
Oh, yeah, yep. Yeah, that's not talking about the overall imperfection of the formula.
Right.
It's just talking about the bookkeeping part of it.
Just recall the sheer volume of referenda, the dollar volume of referenda that were
yeah.
passed last year. Yeah, I mean, it really complicates what we're trying to do here.
Well, and if I recall correctly, Milwaukee's ratchets up every year. So their revenue or their spending is going to go up every year for, what was it, like 3 or 4 steps, I think?
I want to say it was like 4 steps up.
And Madison's can't possibly have kicked in yet because they took a decrease this year as well. So.
They just passed it in,
Yeah, so I mean, this is only going to get worse, it seems to me.
Yeah. I think it'll eventually become normal because those referendums will be baked in at that point, and you'll forget the swings.
Mr. Harlan, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to, I guess, inquire, what are the repercussions for the district potentially not moving forward with approving this preliminary budget?
We need something to present at the budget hearing now. We don't have to hold it, I forget the date it is, it's whatever the board meeting date is in September. But you have to hold one before final adoption. So, just delaying the exact conversation, I guess, is the only repercussion. It doesn't have any set authority or anything like that. It's really for the community to have insight into what the budget planning is.
Would that allow us more time to verify some of the potential calculations we're seeing in Milwaukee?
Well, I think we can do that heading into the October 15th certification. I think that's the window of time. So this number, because the aid number I have in here isn't going to be the aid number. I mean, the chances of that are almost zero. So I think you can go through that process with adopting this and still have that conversation before final adoption in October. But that's up to the board to decide.
Mrs. Voigt?
I think the key is this is a preliminary budget. You know, it is not the final by any means. So, you know, I think that that's what we're approving, not anywhere near the final version of it.
I think it's interesting too, is to understand what steps would we have to take to certify their numbers. when you can't get them to submit information at all on time, years after. I don't know what that would look like. I like the concept of it a lot. I just don't know what that would look like as to where you would start.
And I've lost track of what years they haven't even
Submitted yet.
submitted. I don't know if they know the number at this point to even reconcile to, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not an expert in MPS's operation either, so.
I think at the end of the day, nobody's comfortable approving a draft of something that we don't control, right? And we've been through this number of cycles, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I think the bigger challenge for me is that our local newspaper will make it a front page story because they don't understand the variables that are moving. And we just need to be very clear in communicating that this is a preliminary budget based on draft numbers that we're getting from the Department of Public Instruction that are based on a number of variables that are moving that we don't have control over.
Yeah, and this is, and I highlighted it, but I'll just say it again. It's not just the aid, it's the fact that we set up that Fund 39 levy for the sole purpose of not having to have this conversation. And I thought we did a really nice job of laying that out and even giving us a smaller step the following year to help cushion that. But in the end, we're the byproduct of formulas, and this is what the calculations are.
So we're looking to do two motions, correct?
With total revenues and expenditures in one, and then the levy amount in the other.
We could modify the numbers. I mean, we can put whatever preliminary budget we want. I'm saying this for Mr. Harlan's benefit. But I wouldn't have any more confidence over modified numbers than I would what we're looking at right now. And we had done that in the past where we had approved a preliminary budget that had a little higher, a little bigger increase in the tax levy than we thought we might end up with because we didn't want to surprise people on the back end. And while I thought that was responsible of us to do that, it was miscommunicated. And so we didn't benefit from doing that either because it was headline news and it was misrepresented. So I don't know that there's any benefit to trying to work with a different set of numbers because it's so difficult to understand the formula that it's not going to get appropriately represented.
No, I understand that it's preliminary. None of these numbers are going to be the official number. It just doesn't feel right to have to vote to basically be held hostage to numbers that we can't control to run our district the way we see fit.
Mrs. Voigt?
I think the taxpayers need to know that as a conservative, fiscally conservative board for decades, we've been punished since West was built. The formulas that have been in place have just been against us. The more we try to be fiscally conservative, the more we get a bad deal from the other elements that they throw into the mix. And I think we've done an amazing job of trying to deal with the hand that's dealt us. Despite the facts that we've been trying to do some positive things, it just doesn't work out that way for us. And I think it's really important for taxpayers to realize that. We've been trying really, really hard for decades to do the right thing, and it doesn't always turn out that way.
Right. You're rewarded for spending, so spend more and you're going to get more. It's backwards. Mr. Webb?
Yeah, so I am with Mr. Harland on this 100%. I feel as though I am being held hostage and that I have to vote for these numbers because we don't have a choice because of the way that, and it's not just the way that the funding is established, it's the timing. We are a month away from the start of our 25-26 school year, and it doesn't even really give us any time to appropriately go back through and say, can we find dollars in our budget that we can wring out to try to close that gap. It's too late. We're a month away.
We're also 2 months into our fiscal year
And
already.
yes, and we're too, exactly.
So backward.
I mean, I'm beating the dead horse. This process is horribly broken. But I'm gonna have a hard time voting for either the levy or the revenue, at least on a preliminary basis, because it sits wrong with me that I've gotta take that vote and know I have no control to do anything other than to accept these numbers because of what DPI has determined is our allotment for this year. And I don't even know if their numbers are trustworthy. I'm not saying they're not. I don't know that they are. I don't even know who audits those numbers.
I think it's an interesting complexity. It's been the process as long as public education has been founded on how the process works. Like it, don't like it, we can dig our heels in at some point. We do need to be able to move forward, whether we do a stay today only to come back in a month, we're still gonna need to be able to do. And there is portions of the budget, obviously, that we do know that we can navigate and we do have control over, but the funding formula itself, I'm not gonna disagree, it is broken. But I don't know what we're gonna do tonight or within the next month to change that. Dr. Piasek?
Unfortunately, there's not really a hostile yes component in Robert's rules, so you're either on the record as yes or you're not. I do think,
She voted with a frown on her face.
yeah, not a
Like that?
I do think from a procedural perspective, we have a responsibility to notify the public what budget numbers we're looking at right now that are likely to inform our final budget. And we do not have the capacity to influence the funding formula at this point in time. And so when October comes around, we will be dependent on those certified aid numbers that the DPI gives us, and there aren't a whole lot of other levers that we have to work with. So I'm not opposed to taking more time if we want to come back before we have to have, to meet the requirements for budget hearing perspective. I don't know what's going to change between now and then, and I do think we have a responsibility to notify the public at least what financial situation we're looking at right now.
And our actual timeline is actually shorter than the September meeting date, because we have to post it in the newspaper a couple weeks in advance, so then you have to get it to the paper even tighter timeline, but, so just keep that in mind as well. Again, if we hold to that date.
All right, I'm going to motion to approve the budgeted revenue of $217,827,436 and the preliminary budgeted expenditures of $227,464,886.
I second it.
Second. It's been moved and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Parliamentary procedure. I'm gonna ask for a roll call on this.
Okay. Tanya, can you please take a roll call vote?
Dr. Piasek?
Aye.
Mrs. Kozlowski?
Aye.
Mrs. Boyd?
Aye.
Mr. Bach?
No.
And Mr. Hurley?
No.
Okay. It passes 3-2. Darren, can you make that a little bigger?
Does that help?
So the levy, 3.77?
help?
Yes.
It's a PDF, so it's.
I motion to approve the preliminary budget for the change in levy of 3.77%.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Tadia, will you please take the roll call?
Mr. Harlan?
No.
Mr. Wad?
No.
Mrs. Boyd?
I pass, aye.
Mrs. Kozlowski.
Aye.
Dr. Piasek.
Aye. Can I just ask, Connie, that you make a note that there was a request for a roll call from Dr. Wad?
Sure.
Or from Mr. Wad for that. For Dr. Wad.
Passes 3-2. All right, so now we are at the point, we're going to move into our discussion or information items, and we're moving into the monthly budget report.
So as Darren stated, we are not completely completed with our audit for 24-25. However, I wanted to bring a few things to your attention that did occur in that year. One of which was health claims. We actually saw an additional $2 million in claims this past year over the year prior. However, we did see a stop-loss reimbursement of nearly $1 million. Additionally, we saw a reduction in our drug claims due to a costly biosimilar medication that was introduced into the formulary, and that saved us about $600,000 this past year. The tax levy, we have received to date 84.1% of our tax levy from 24-25, and we will be receiving the balance in August, and that has been placed on our books as a receivable for the 24-25 school year. A few things for this coming year I did want to bring to your attention is in the 25-26 school year, DPI has made some changes to WOOFR. This will make it a little more difficult to compare old data to new data, but I will have a mapping of what the old and the new is to make it easier on all of us as we have those conversations.
Yeah, DPI comes out with a cluster. This year, there's more than what we've seen in the past. So when you go to look at object numbers that historically you can follow a trend line, all of a sudden, something that was 340 is now 341, and half of it's 342, and half of it's, so.
It's primarily Fund 27 that they are revamping this time around.
All of my charts are pulled up.
And that's it for now, unless there's any other questions that I can help with.
Can you walk us through the narrative?
Oh, sorry, I missed that part. Yes, the notable?
Yes, please.
The notable for the 24-25 school year versus the prior year. So I did miss that piece, my apologies. In Fund 10, Object 382, which is tuition open enrollment, we did have a $420,000 increase this year. In Fund 10, 387, which is, I forget what 387 means, I apologize. Our state general aid deduction increased by $400,000. And our WPCP, what was that again? The
choice programs.
choice programs, thank you. Also increased by $250,000. And our new independent charter deduction also increased by $1 million this past year. And then in Fund 27, Object 370, these are where our alternate placements are for Richardson, Lad Lake, and so forth. We had a $750,000 increase in those costs as well.
So can you, just for breakdown, Darren, can you just give a context of what this means? Because these are a relatively large variance from where we've been.
Yeah, and some of those, this is expenditure to expenditure, so budgets were adjusted according to, not to the scale. So this is in terms of us working, we spend a lot of time talking about us working till fall. This is an area, those account codes there, where we really need to spend a lot of time between now and then, along with open enrollment, and try to get a better idea of where we are, because those numbers you're talking about are certainly going to make our 24-25 year and much, much tighter than if historical would have held. But we also deal with that on a fairly regular basis with some line item somewhere. So, but we thought these were big enough that we wanted to bring it back, especially when you get into those choice programs, because that's another number we really, especially the independent charter schools, it's a hard number to predict. Or sometimes the growth is so fast you don't want to even think those numbers are real. But this is a different different world. There's a lot of choices out there, and they're seeing it financially, and a lot of these costs run through our books. That's the way the state, for the choice program, we get to count the kids they have at one point, and then we get a bill at the end of June, so, at the end of our fiscal year, oddly so.
Any questions? I thought those were fair to call out. Thank you.
I would add, though, in terms of costs and budgeting, the numbers we're looking at right now, I think for the 80% of our budget, the salaries and benefits, I think we're nailing it. But you get into these areas where it's more subjective, and they're bigger dollars than they ever used to be, it's just getting a little tougher.
Well, and I think that comes on to, even going back to the budget, when we talk about the controllable versus the not controllable, there still is a very large amount of our budget where we do have the ability to control and we're leveraging and navigating, right? So it's the right sizing based on the pupil counts and the curriculum and the staffing spend. So there is still a piece to that we leverage. But this is a surprise in the variance that, generally speaking, bigger than normal. So I thought that was good. Thank you. Okay, so we're moving into other business. Is there recommendations for future committee meetings? Mrs. Voigt.
I would like us to consider the suggestion to return the sixth graders to the elementary school as a reversal of the program that had been put in place back, whatever year it was mentioned in.
10-11, I think it was.
10-11, with the expectation that it would be a temporary change as the bubble of population in the elementary school got to the point that there was no more room in the schools. They moved them up to middle school. Now that there's room, could they be returned back to that base and that form of education that had been a solid base for us? I guess I was looking at one of the alternative plans that one of the parents had put together. There were a lot of great things going on when the kids were in sixth grade in terms of the music program and some of the leadership opportunities the kids had that they've lost in this
Point of
temporary
order.
bubble.
I think we're debating the merits of the
Understood.
proposal.
So, Mrs. Voigt, we have an entire optimizing our future process set up for this, and we have deliberately made sure that discussion stays within the community at the full board level, but rather than the committees, because of the magnitude of what we're trying to do for the overall future of it. And I think that part is interjected within that process.
Okay. It's just something that had come up that wasn't in part of our original 4 plans that parents are looking at as now and including into like their next plan that they'd like to suggest as an alternative.
Understood, and I think that all rolls out when we start to move that process forward. But thank you.
Okay.
We do have a need to adjourn to executive session. I would be looking for someone to motion us out. Mr. Wad.
Yeah. I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, sub 1, sub E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing in public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
Second.
Second, it's been moved and seconded. Tanya, could you take the roll call?
Mrs. Kozlowski,
Aye.
Mr. Herlin,
Aye.
Dr. Piasek.
Aye.
Mr. Wad.
Aye.
And Mrs. White.
Aye.
Okay, we will have a need to come back into open session. We are now officially in closed session. And we are back into open session for the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. I'd be looking for a motion.
Motion to approve the first student transportation amendment contract as presented.
Mrs. Voigt,
A second.
second's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. That concludes our meeting for this month. We will reconvene in Monday, September 8th, here in the boardroom. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.